As the head of the landscape architecture section, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker and Glimcher distinguished visiting professor, Michel Desvigne. Michel's lecture of tonight is the final of a series of presentations given to the students over the course of 3 visits to Columbus. For those of you who are not familiar with the Glimcher Distinguished Visiting Professorship, it allows to bring to the Knowlton School landscape architects of international renown to present their work to and work with students. It is a fantastic resource made possible by an alumna of the program, Didi Glimcher, and her husband, Herb Glimcher, and I was thoroughly thrilled to take this opportunity to introduce the work and thinking of Michel Desvigne to the students. Michel's visits also were the trigger for an investigation by the Senior Design Studio and the Glimcher Seminar, led by Assistant Professor Sarah Coles and visiting lecturer Nick Glaze. The results you will be able to see in the fantastic models assembled in the Banvard Gallery for the exhibition Bigger Derby. Bigger is always better, in spite of what they say. Please attend the opening after the lecture and recognize the incredible amount of work carried out by the students and their instructors. In terms of Michel being here, it has given us the opportunity of introducing the students to an extraordinary body of work, some of which you will see tonight, and conversely introduce Michel to a bit of Ohio. And here is standing in a field of corn at the Waterman farm. I have known Michel for 20 years. It has, from when I wrote on the mostly theoretical projects that he was carrying out with Christine Dalnocchi at the time, when he was already collaborating with architects such as Renzo Piano. In a sense, his work is perfectly contemporary, as it is highly recognizable, yet not advocating for a specific form. He struggles with the same questions that most landscape architects struggles with, namely the ineffable and the non-object quality of the landscape. And yet, he leads multidisciplinary teams of architects, including teams like OMA, Norman Foster, to name a couple, urban designers and planners, on vast projects spanning decades. He questions the notion of master planning to propose instead tools, languages, and methods, risking the very quality of spaces that he's seeking to create. He has time and understands the need of landscape architecture as a key component of urbanization to shape future cities, as in the Saclay project south of Paris, which I'm sure he'll show tonight, and proposing scenarios for the interface of suburban and rural areas. He's currently seeking an agronomist to reframe the debate on urban agriculture and productive landscapes, so I think OSU would be a perfect place for him to start working. He invented new terrains through the sequencing of vegetation, as in the Greenwich Peninsula, which you just saw here, but also intervened on post-industrial neighborhoods such as in Lyon and Bordeaux, which you see here, and all these projects are spanning 15 to 30 years, so again, he has time. Today, he deals with large territories, but in a sense, I think he's still seeking the same qualities that he was achieving in projects like the courtyard of the Rue de Meaux that you saw in the first image, and what he calls the culture of space, or the lack thereof. So please join me in welcoming Michel explaining his theories tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me? No, that's a pity. Can you hear me now? Try? Again, she said. Okay. It's a very new lecture I will try to do. And just to reassure you, we'll see 120 pictures, 36 projects, 30 years. But what I try to do is, because Dorothée asked me to show a wide range of different kind of projects. So what I did is I selected themes, and I will not try to describe precisely project, but I will try to illustrate some themes by project, which makes it lighter. and easier. And if it's too boring, we'll stop sometimes. So it's, okay, 30 years. When I realized that yesterday night, I thought it was a lot. And for landscape architect, I think it's nothing. It's the very beginning of something. Sometime Dorothée will help me with my English, of course. So the first theme is about natural mechanisms. Could sound strange. So we start with, sometime I will give you dates. So it's in 1984. And I was studying in Versailles, this school of landscape architecture, and I had an American Polaroid camera. Was that American? And I took hundreds of pictures. And I was really interested in this kind of shapes that are produced by a natural mechanism. By the way, this is an artificial quarry where movement of water produced this kind of very strange shapes. I've been studying geology, but I was not a very serious scientist because I was too much interested in this kind of aesthetic. I mean, all these shapes produced by natural mechanism. Like, you know, erosion in a wasteland. And I was very interested also in the interference between something built and a natural phenomenon. I mean, it's something that everybody experiments along a river, on a beach, where if you put your foot on the sand, then when the wave is going back, you have this kind of shapes behind your feet. This is a kind of very elementary feeling I love. This was in 1987. I was in Roma, in Villa Medici. And I started with this kind of collection of pictures where you can see both natural phenomenon and its interferences with some construction. I don't know if you can feel it. I hope so. And I started doing this kind of models. I called that elementary gardens. And it was all about, you know, it was sand, gravels, and water jet. And I loved these interferences again between geometry, artifice, and some natural phenomenon like erosion. I recently realized that there will be diversion. Sorry, Dorothée. It was very, I've been asked to think about Italian production of the 80s. And it's not that known, I mean, but there were people like Vittorio Gregotti in Italy and others, Archizoom, and they were working exactly with this kind of vision. I mean, some artifice dealing with nature, with very strong buildings sometimes. And we all have been extremely influenced by the grid meeting some topography, which is deeply rooted in your American culture. Some historian recently shown how Ramcola's thinkings were so close to this Italian production of the 80s. And I was very strongly influenced by this work. So sorry, maybe it's, and you cannot understand it, but in some of this picture, you will recognize some production of the architect in Italy of the 80s. A paper production. And I spent very long time, you know, again, this was in 87. Google Earth was not existing, according to what I know. And I had a kind of book. I was fascinated by the book of some pictures from a satellite. It was very new. And we have a little print of that. And I spent like 2 years doing this kind of drawings, which were not exactly a reproduction. It was a kind of, I don't know, transposition of what I saw on these aerial pictures. And precisely on the square on the left side, there is a kind of city, and a river crosses a city where you have all these piers. And what fascinates me still is the way these piers interfere with the stream. And this was a kind of, in my work, it started to be a kind of possible gardens. And I did what, I forgot the name, sorry. I'm jet lagged. Okay, so let's say elementary garden. So it's a series of projects. And you see it's a kind of valley. In the middle of the valley, the river crosses a kind of garden. The garden, in my mind, was a series of objects built within the riverbed. And this is a kind of study drawing of the same project, where you can see some construction, and the construction in the waterbed, in the riverbed, you know, kept some alluvium and built kind of islands. So it's very close to the first picture we have seen from the Polaroid, where, you know, stupidly some wooden stake or some concrete mass just help build an island. And of course, in my project, there was a kind of cycle where sometimes when there is a flood, everything is flushed out, and then the cycle starts again. But again, it's all about this interference between construction, artifice, and nature, natural phenomenon. Sorry, it just takes time. So this is in '96. Adrien Reus from West 8 invited me for Rotterdam Biennale of Architecture, and he asked me to do a project south of Rotterdam that was dealing with both flood and city expansion. I will not explain you everything, but mostly it was the idea of dealing with flood, reopening rivers where all this country has been fenced by kind of ditches, dikes, sorry. So reopening dikes, putting new dikes on riverbed, I will not explain you. So dealing with natural shapes to infill the place, and finding what is drawn in white and yellow or brown, finding places for both circulation and city expansion. And what I like is, you know, this is a flooded place where you have the kind of, not flood, of course, city expansions. But what was the result of this process was to build a city that really expresses this natural phenomenon of flood and previous riverbeds, and creates interesting conditions for cities, vis-a-vis, island, archipelago, everything we can enjoy in cities like Stockholm in Sweden. In '90, this was a project with Renzo Piano in California, never built, in Newport. And I did understand that it was a dry place. I never went at this time. And we thought that we could dig out a kind of artificial canyon in which we would have built some dams to keep some moisture or water. And in this case, vegetation would have been planted within this artificial canyon with the use of dams, and everything else would have been dry, a desert. And about architecture, of course, you can recognize what I did in Roma. And on the very left of the picture, this was the wall of the museum drawn by Renzo Piano. And I love both this articulation between walls and dams, and again, artifice and kind of nature. And having been now in California, I think I have seen places, this kind of small canyon with vegetation and moisture within very dry landscapes. I recently recycled this kind of project in Doha, Qatar. So this project is, we are doing it today. And this model has probably 2 years. Qatar is even a little bit drier than California, very dry. And we could be absolutely cynical in this kind of country, but we can also be very careful and very precise with some pre-existing topography. Of course there is a topography, and there are uses like agricultural uses. And this is a wadi park. A wadi is a depression, it's a kind of dry valley. And on this long park, it's a 3 kilometers long park under construction now. We will dig a kind of artificial valley. Within, we will build this kind of dams that will keep not real water, but some little moisture that is present enough to help have some vegetation. It's exactly what we can see from an helicopter in Doha. And so you can recognize everything is an artifice, a kind of amplified topography that start to look a little bit more like a canyon. And within this canyon, dams, moisture, vegetation. So we try to create natural condition with an artifice to have a kind of park, where everywhere else in this kind of country, people have been just using artificial irrigation, wherever, with no coherence with what could exist naturally. And of course, I'm extremely interested in this kind of sculpture of both kind of dunes and valley and dams and bridges and passerelles. And I mean, this is 1 year ago, but they are doing it. And as you can see, it's sort of big. And I really like this kind of pictures. You know, it records me the small models I did in Roma, but the tools are a little bit stronger here. And it's very impressive to see. I have no real idea about what will be the result. I hope it will be good. Okay, a second theme is about textures. In 89, in Paris, we did this garden with Christine Dalnocchi in a courtyard built by Renzo Piano. This is social housing, and we planted 100 birches in a very small courtyard, 60 meters per 20. It was extremely unusual in France to do that. How many years ago? More than 20 years ago. We even were sued by an expert, a landscape architect expert, and we were sued because the client said, this is not a garden, these are not trees. Because a tree for these people was, you know, you see, a kind of big lamppost. But then we won a big prize, and okay, we were fine. Some tree died. Okay, so it's about texture. You know, I was very happy to build in a courtyard of social housing in Paris this kind of micro-forest. And think about it, all around this very small courtyard, you have 8 floors of social housing. And this kind of milieu, this ambiance within the courtyard makes real sense. Afterward, of course, I've been traveling a little bit more, and I discovered that in Russia, in housing built during the regime, I mean, all courtyards are like that, which is still great, except today they are turning them into car parks. Then in 2011, more recently, this is a garden built in the courtyard of the culture minister in Paris. It's even smaller, you know, 170 square meters, so like 1,700 square feet. And it's a reproduction, it's a miniature of a native forest around Paris. I guess in this very small garden we have been planting 1,000 plants, and it has been planted in 3 days per horizontal layers. I love the drawings we had on the bottom because we had to organize everything. A team of 10 people during 3 days have been planting everything. And the picture on top are the immediate results. And I really love this kind of work. So, you know, of course, it's all sheeted. I mean, it's not really native. We have been helping a little bit the nature with embellishment. I mean, this maple tree has nothing to see in this forest. Nobody realized, by the way. And I really like that. I mean, to play, why not to plant a big park with this kind of control? You know, sometimes I think we are extremely poor with the use of vegetation. I'm doing a studio right now in GSD in Cambridge, and I'm a little bit surprised by the way students are using vegetation. I think we have a lot to invent with vegetation, and to play with this kind of mechanism could bring to very interesting results. Okay. This is in Tokyo, 2004. It's in Keio University, and it used to be a Nogushi's garden, except university has been building a tower on Nogushi's garden. They were a little bit guilty, and they asked me to do some garden, some reproduction of the Nogushi's garden. It was a competition. We won it. Of course, we didn't reproduce Nogushi's garden. We did this one that has some connection with Noguchi. And I must insist, I'm not interested in the dots. Absolutely not. So please don't reproduce that. I mean, this is fashion, but I don't wear this kind of clothes. And we need the dots to grow some vegetation. And this is what interests me. I mean, the texture of the vegetation we will see. Dots are necessary to make them grow. So it's a kind of place where everybody can walk except on the dots. These are reverse stepping stones. You can walk everywhere except on the stepping stones, just to leave some space for vegetation. But what interests me, so this is Nogushi's sculpture and some vision. Okay, and this is more interesting. Okay, what I wanted to do is, I've been looking at what Noguchi did. And he did kind of, I don't know, he was playing with natural shapes in his way. Look at his work. And because he was a sculptor, but he did some gardens. And the way he was playing with natural shape was with his own fantasy. And we did it like that. So. And it was a succession of clearings and micro woods. And it is exactly what interests me. It's a miniature of a forest, a playful miniature of a forest, and people could be inside. And just by the way, you can see there is no visible fence. Here's a picture. So this is like 8 years after completion. No maintenance has been done during 8 years. That's only pity. But I don't care too much about it. So dots are vanishing, and it's all about clearings and micro woods. And you see no visible railing, and the garden is both part of this glass edge. And so this garden is floating on a roof. But again, what interests me is the use of vegetation, the use of texture. More recently, I mean, we completed it last year, 2013, in Tokyo again. We have been in charge of very small gardens, but in a very important place. Sorry, with the arrow, it's somewhere here. But we don't have the picture of the transformation. And in this place, which is just in front of Imperial Palace, You know, the A12 corresponds to a kind of primary forest that remained within the imperial palace garden. And there is a very strange regulation on this place, a little bit ambiguous, where you can do a lot of things, but you have to bring some primary forest within this zone, which is a little bit, of course, exaggerated. So we had to do a small garden with a primary forest. And during 6 years, this is our garden pre-planted in a landscape. I mean, I don't know if it's 6 or 10 years, but a long time. So this was a kind of nursery where we transplanted trees, and this is exactly the footprint of our garden, and it has been growing safely in this fantastic landscape. And last year, after completion of the big tower and the main metro station in Tokyo, on the top of the metro station, we have been removing triple tree, this primary forest, in the city. And the picture has been taken just after completion, in end of winter. And I like it. And this is the very gate of a main metro station in the city. And this is at night. Okay, again, this is about texture. In 2010, this is in Alésia, in Burgundy, with American architect Bernard Tschumi, doing a museum where I never went. And as any time, we were in charge of a car park. I mean, usually a landscape architect is doing car parks, and I love that. And this is in country, and we try to do a car park that is done by micro woods, clearings, and grass. It's a big car park. And I'm extremely interested in this kind of composition, which is an artifice dealing with micro wood, with different densities and species on this way. So what you see is our plans and study models. It's obviously an artifice, and cars will park within the clearings that are overdimensioned in such a way that you can park a little bit in random within the clearings. That will help save, that will help keep the grass alive. And this is the first year in winter, so a little bit masochist. But still, I like it. I mean, I'm extremely interested in, so it's about texture, artifice, but when you look at it on the landscape, it makes sense. It's not a pseudo-nature. It will be a wood on a few years. It will look like a wood, and there will be grass on the clearing in this wood. And it's a big car park. Of course, the grass is a reinforced grass on which you can drive, not everywhere, by the way, but we have to improve it. So it's not really a decor. It's a wood. What interests me about architecture is these densities, these visual plans, this succession of clearings and massive parts. This was in 2006, and it's in Minneapolis. It's for Minneapolis, for the Walker Art Center with Herzog et de Meuron as architect. And we were trying to work with this kind of different densities, different geometries, different species, so a kind of composition with textures rather than with, axis. And we did these small study models with extremely different results according different geometries, densities, proportion, diversity of species as well that are shown by colors. And I do realize how vegetation is playful. I mean, with vegetation, you can invent incredibly different compositions. It's a fantastic medium to work with. These models are part of the collection of the Walker now, but we didn't, we started it, but we didn't complete this garden because, because of the crisis and the directors changed. And Ai Weiwei and Petra Blaise are doing it now in a very different way. But we were very happy to experiment this kind of textures in such a way that we could use it at a wider scale. This is in 2010 in Skolkovo, south of Moscow. This is going to be, or not, a very big campus, research campus. They already started it, by the way, and it will be a big forest, as you see, an artificial forest. And of course, you can recognize how Minneapolis was for us a fantastic prototype to think about this wide forest. Wide? Yes, big forest. We did this study with a kind of strange collage of different textures, but the collage takes in account everything that exists on site: topography, edges, construction, path network, urban design project. It looks very similar to something existing on the neighborhood in Russian forest. So it's both an artifice, but it deals with everything on site. I hope it will reveal everything that certainly exists on site. It's not a nice landscape. Around Moscow, it's a rather boring and poor landscape, except forest. And the play with texture, with clearing, with different density will produce, according to me, a very interesting space. And we spent really a very long, everything has been drawn at very large scale for a wide, very large place. And I love this. And these strange drawings shows you how we deal with urban designer and architect. By the way, good ones, like you have footprint of Herzog et de Meuron, Rem Koolhaas, Katsuyo Sejima, etc., etc. Only Pritzker prizes. It's a fantastic collection they have. And I love that my texture works with their architecture in a curious way. What does I mean, it just means that literally footprints, dealing like all traces on the pre-existing landscape, not a very serious urban design composition. A texture, a play with texture. It could be a debate. This is from 2002 or 2012 with another Pritzker Prize, your Pritzker Prize, and Yao Ming Pei. It's in front of the Modern Art Museum in Luxembourg. Pei has been drawing a large piazza, and we were not totally convinced by both his building and piazza, and we have been superimposing a forest, and he was very happy with that, a forest to its piazza. And we planted 400 forest trees on this parvis, and I love this mixture of artscape and softscape, and it's, again, all about texture. The composition is not about any geometry. It's all about texture, density. One will find its way through these trees. Even a fire truck will find its way, you can see it, through this very strange urban forest. So a new theme in this lecture, which is more difficult: time management and, again, traces. What do I mean? So this was in '93 in Issoudun, center of France, with Christine Dalnoky at this time. And we had to transform previous social gardens. These are not exact words, Dorothée. Allotment gardens, sort of abandoned because people are getting old and lazy. And we had to turn them into a public park. And we thought we could keep everything, but changing everything. And I call that a substitution process. So we keep traces, but we change everything in it. No longer vegetables, but willows, flowers, gravels, but dealing with traces and managing time. And these pictures, so we kept some traces, even some fruit trees, and we superimposed some new traces also. And what was very nice during the opening of it is it was very familiar to people. They knew the place. It was not a new garden. It was not a new place. They knew everything about it, except everything has been changing. And what I've been showing in Skolkovo was dealing with the same kind of substitution processes. We keep all traces, but we change everything. So it's not a conservation process. It's not a restoration. It's an invention, but dealing with traces, playing with traces. This is in 2011. It's close to Paris. It's in Boulogne. It used to be Renault factory. The name is Ile-Seguin, and we are still working on it with Jean Nouvel. And it used to be a factory, but it has been destroyed. And when we started to think about it, the kind of plinth was left on site. It used to be a strong concrete slab, 1.3 kilometers long, where machines from the old industry were located. Everything has to be destroyed because it was unstable. But we were asked to think about public spaces with a very little knowledge about urban design on it, because the project was not done. And we did these drawings. So on the top, this is a drawing of the previous structure, meaning columns and beams. And the drawing on the bottom is our drawing. Black corresponds to depression, sunken places, and white corresponds to public spaces, artscape. And we were thinking again about a transposition from what existed first, and we didn't want to build stereotyped public spaces with street, garden, piazza, small street, blah, blah. We wanted to keep the kind of plinth that the factory has. But of course, we have to rebuild everything. And this is a kind of place where you could have, so this is reversed, but black corresponds to artscape, where people can walk and drive sometime. And white corresponds to sunken gardens, and the gardens help us organize traffic engineering. Not traffic engineering, traffic. At a certain point, we were asked to build a prototype, a mock-up. Because of the crisis, nothing is built now. And the mayor wanted us to give a public access. Nobody never has been working on this island, because it has been built as an island for a factory. And we had to build a provisory garden, a prefiguration garden, to experiment our master plan and to give an access in a provisory way to public. And I am interested in these two themes, dealing with traces and dealing with time, which you see works together. And this is a provisory garden. It will be destroyed. It has been built like 3 years ago. It will stay for 2 to 3 years again, and then we will kill it and do a new one with Jean Nouvel's. Maybe this will be a covered garden. But what interests me is this prefiguration garden. It's very simple. Furnitures have been done by Ines Arrange as an architect, and they are very important. But the place is an observatory of urban design happening around it. And you can see on this drawing a building from Jean Nouvel, a building from Norman Foster and others. Everything happens around, and this is a place where people go because it's playful, it's not so serious, and it's a place from which you see the place. And it changed, it's extremely important to work with that. These kind of urban design processes are never shorter than 30 years, sometimes 40 years, even in a very important city center. It takes time. Usually this is fenced, and during 30 years it's wasteland where you're not allowed to go and nothing happens. And it's stupid. We must use this time to create new practices, to welcome people, to change the mental picture people have of a place, and it's part of the process of urban design. And it's very nice to see every weekend this place crowded, and it's already a garden, even if it will be transformed. About the writing of this garden, I think it's interesting because we were detached, if this is English. It's not very serious. It was not supposed to stay. And people have been, it's very successful because people find its way to be in. Sometimes a real garden done by a real landscape architect is terribly boring because it's univoque. It has sometimes a too heavy meaning, and you have to deal with this meaning. This is absolutely with no meaning. It's a prototype, it's a mock-up, and it changed a lot my way to think about landscape architecture and architecture. So still about traces and about time management. This is in Bordeaux, and the picture we have, this map is 6 kilometers long, and this is the very center of Bordeaux. This is the right bank of Bordeaux, and it used to be industrial. It will be turned into city center in housing, and we thought that landscape architecture could accompany and prefigurate this mutation. And if you are creative enough, you can try to think what means these 3 successive pictures. This has been done for MoMA. And it's dealing, anytime there is an available parcels, we will plant it. And then there will be more available parcel, we'll plant it again, but trees will have grown, this is the bottom, then they will have grown later. So there are 3 successive stages that do not correspond to zones, but to layers on the same place. So we will work and rework and add parts to this growing park. This is what I call time management. Usually we work by zone. Zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and this is a park. No, we think the park will be the addition of everything done, and we like to work not only on the river edge, but deeply on this very large bank. And of course, this welcomes a new urban development. Right now, we are developing big urban development with both MVRDV and other urban designer that will be rooted within this landscape. So when I say it prefigurates a city, it's really true. This vegetation builds the framework of a city. And this vegetation is a footprint of the previous industry. So we keep the memory of the industrial traces, and this memory transposed into a landscape architecture is the framework of a new development on 6 kilometers long. I don't know, a big part of it will be like that. Maybe other architect will have hard time to follow these rules. I don't know exactly, but a part of it will work. And we started to plant these trees, thousands of trees, young trees with my density. So question is that a park? Yes. But, you know, it's a very young first step of a park. We are still working on it, of course, so we have a contract for years. Every year we are adding some trees and cutting trees and removing trees according what happens. But still we work with this texture and this massive presence, this density. So it looks like a nursery. And by the way, it is a kind of nursery. It's a living nursery. I really like this kind of places, you know. Definitely a young park sometimes with a lot of design is difficult in this kind of wasteland condition, in this very large territory under mutations. They have no understanding and they are dated, and I feel uncomfortable with this. We did some, of course. Now I'm trying to work with this, playing with structure, texture, accompanying mutation, creating new practices, moving mental picture of a place. It's a fragile but strong process. And I feel very happy. You know, a countryside is a chantier. How do you say that, Dorothée? Agriculture is a construction site, in a way. You have earth, mud, fence, wood, stakes, grids, and it's nice. It's very nice because you understand what it is. I mean, never in a country you feel, wow, that's ugly. It's very new, we have to wait it to grow, it will be better, it will, no, you feel it's very nice because you understand what happens, you understand the processes. In a young park done by another landscape architect, of course, I feel very uncomfortable sometimes because I don't understand what it is. I see a drawing, a very important drawing, and some very young trees. I have a hard time to understand. It's boring. I feel better in countryside. So I'm bored in my own garden as well, to be honest. And I try to make them look as a countryside. Very close to this place in Bordeaux, we did a big mock-up. As everywhere in the world, they have huge parking lots and no means to transform them, no means to refurbish them. And we try this experience, saying, okay, we'll keep this tarmac, we don't care, but we try to bring some vegetation on it with cheap means. And we literally cut tranchées. We fill this tranchée with a famous Cornell mixture, volcanic stone and earth, and we planted trees in layers. Some have been dying, some are still alive. It's still an abandoned parking lot, but something happens in it. And the kind of ironical story is that now we are building a stadium. Herzog et de Meuron are building a stadium in it, and we are using this transformed landscape and improving it and increasing it to do the parvis, I mean the piazza in front of the stadium. So the process was not hopeless, something happens, and it will be a public space in the city. And I like this management in time. It would have taken 10 years to do it. Now, again, more difficult theme. It's going more and more difficult during the lecture. I will drink a little bit of water. So it's about lisière. Lisière is a French word. We tried with Dorothée and with you to translate it in English. It doesn't exist. It's, how do you say that? It's a forest edge. You know, around the forest, you have a spatial palette with underspecies of a forest that grows around like a coat, like a skin around a forest. But we use the word in a wider way to represent all edges, conditions, which are very interesting often. So this was in '95 when we met Dorothée, and you do remember this small garden in Issoudun where this was a kind of fake flower bed, or I don't know what it was, traces. And the mayor was an important guy, despite the small city, and I've been asking him, why aren't you designing your landscape around your city? Because as everywhere in the world, on this picture you can recognize, of course, an interesting European framework of agricultural parcels, a very medieval-like drawing, but the periphery of this city is a classic urban sprawl that has been built by architect, landscape architect, urban designer, politician, everywhere in the world. By the way, there is always somebody that drew them, sometimes landscape architect. And this is my more important subject. I mean, we cannot pretend to be a professional landscape architect and surviving with this urban sprawl, with this kind of houses just within the countryside with no transition, no connection, no relationship, no structure, no landscape, nothing, no public spaces. I mean, in Europe, 50% of housing construction is urban sprawl. In the US, I have no ideas. I guess it's similar, even worse. And landing this morning in your place, I've seen, because usually it was night, this time it was day, and you have a lot of this kind of housing, including uncompleted housing within the countryside. And this camp condition is unacceptable. So for me, this is the more important theme in my profession. What can we do? This is the theme of this lecture. With this guy, we said, okay, there's something interesting possibly. Between all these parcels, why not to plant very narrow, shallow layer of trees and having a stupid path between two parcels with an edge, or maybe a row of fruit trees, and this could build an interesting net of orchard paths, a kind of very simple public space network that could improve the quality of the existing urban sprawl, maybe welcome more urban sprawl because people want it, and almost start to create some public space practices. I mean, even, I don't know if it is in America, but in Europe, usually when you are living in country, you would find a path that would drive you from your house to somewhere, in a wood, in a forest. Or maybe you had a garden in your backyard, and the garden, then there was an orchard, then there was a common field, and then there was the open countryside. Today, you have the house, stupid garden, a small grid, and the moon. I mean, a refurbished countryside with a mechanized countryside with no ditches, no hedges, no tree, nothing, and 2 times a year, a guy on a tractor. Sometime chemical product, so a nightmare. And it's absolutely not the mental picture people have of their place. And we definitely have to create this kind of public spaces. I think in the 20th century, we have been building very big cities, including urban sprawl, but we didn't build public spaces at the right size, which was not the case of the 19th century, especially in the US. So this was a very modest try. I mean, why not to plant some trees between parcels? I love this kind of pyjama. And then we have been asked, there is a new city close to Paris, Cergy-Pontoise, and the red shapes corresponds to new edges that could be improved by landscape architecture. A zoom, so you have this kind of how do you call a lotissement? So housing development, so kind of houses. And we try to think with the city that probably we could start to add more big edges and micro wood that could improve quality, that could welcome new roads, and probably that could welcome new housing development in better condition, and start to create a kind of public space. Another zoom, in a very cheap way. And we still think it's feasible with what we call agroforestery. Is that English? You can understand what it means. So, of course, it will be not that productive, but we will add some planting, some orchard within this field, and it starts to build some landscape around this urban sprawl. This is Lille. Square corresponds to, I don't know if it's 10 or 5 kilometers. And this map, very simple, is part of the planning regulation now. So the mayor asked us to think about what will be my city in 2030. And we developed this green area, which are not a green belt. It's not a wall surrounding the city. It's a series of management of agricultural places where we think there could be some rudimental, no, this is not English, some very simple public spaces network. More precisely, we will have this kind of rows of trees, edges, and path network around parcels. But we don't want to create enclosure. It's a very special composition where there will be, like on this picture, perspectives, transparency, openness, and some presence. It means that along the path that will follow these trees, there will be places to stay. There will be benches, there will be fences, there will maybe sometimes some small shelter. And this is what we mean with a very simple public space that will accompany this suburb. It has been decided, it's probably going to happen. I'm very careful, so I say probably. And it's not a restoration, because this is my concern, my personal concern about that. It's not about protection. It's not about conservation. It's an invention. It's a transformation. And we deal with rural tools, with agricultural tools, in a new way. Such a landscape, which is not enclosure, has never been built in our country. I don't have an old picture, but it looks a little bit like some Mondrian's painting, where you have this kind of orthogonal but uncompleted structure that create both places and openness. About these edges, in 2008, with Jean Nouvel, with 10 other teams, we have been involved in Le Grand Paris thinking. So, a series of thinkings about what is this 12 million people city, what can we do with it in the long term? And my contribution was to think about this, again, lisières, these edges. And this, vague map, the very center of Paris is surrounded by the black lane that correspond to 2 million people. Everything else corresponds to 12 million people, and the green edge corresponds to this housing development with a guy 2 times on a tractor. 800 kilometers for Le Grand Paris. So a good business. So there is something to do, obviously. 800 kilometers of people living with the small fence and the moon with a guy 2 times a year on a tractor. Is that a city? But I'm sure in your place it's exactly the same, even worse. we have an experimentation. You see La Tour Eiffel, the tower. So this is Paris Center, and we are 20 kilometers south of Paris, where we are developing a new big campus in Saclay. I will not comment this project, but only the lisière of it. And as a landscape architect, I'm leading a team of urban designer and now architect. Again, only Pritzker prizes, not really, but some of them. Ram Koolhaas, Renzo Piano, blah, blah, all of them. And only landscape architecture could help us build such a big campus. What we're under the eye is 7 kilometers long. How many miles? Let's say 5 miles long. I don't comment everything. We are building all a framework of public spaces that include both forest, natural geography, park system, public spaces network, etc., etc. I am focusing on one thing, this one. On the top of the picture, there are countryside, fields, agriculture. On the black cells, you will have the campuses. And this kind of green horizontal layer, 7 kilometers long, correspond to a kind of park system that I call intermediary landscape. And it is about this lisière. It's about what can we do between urban development, campuses, and agriculture. It's a very interesting place because this campus will host agronomic schools, agronomic research, horticultural research, and maybe some landscape architectural school in the long term. Versailles maybe could be involved in this project. And we have like 250 hectares of intermediary landscape that we try to build. We have that because, sorry, I'm back a second. On this picture, urban designer have been trying to be as compact as they could in such a way that there is even more than the protected agricultural domain. It's listed, of course, and they are not building on agricultural parcel, but we have this additional 250 hectares to deal with. And what we are doing is a kind of park system, but a very strange one. It will welcome experimental places like your farm we visited 2 weeks ago, and it will be experimental land for agronomic school. There will be orchard, there will be public orchard, there will be poplar groves, there will be wetlands, there will be places to collect storm water. So all a series of experimentation that are necessary for cities and that could help build a landscape between open fields and city. And I'm very hopeful with this project. If we do not success in this, I'm hopeless for all our countries. It's about 800 kilometers. This is 7 kilometers. So it's 1% of what we have to complete and to achieve around the Grand Paris. It is a very important thing. And today, okay, so I will show you pictures of the study models. So it's going on. It's now approved. It's in regulation. And we try to have our agronom involved in the process, which is very hard. They don't care too much about that. Why? So what I understood about it, we have this discussion this morning, Dorothée, about it. So in our countries, so definitely it's about agronomy. It's very important. But agronomy is something that doesn't fit with architects and architectural vision and landscape architectural vision. Why? Like in France, agriculture, I mean, we have the second agriculture in the world. US is the first agriculture in the world. But in our country, agriculture covers 55% of the land of the country. But it corresponds to 2% of the economy. And it's very efficient. Of course, what we are doing here will be less efficient than what it is today. So economically, it will have a cost. Who is going to invest in it? So this is a big question. We are in a very easy place because of the schools and because of state involvement in this main campus. But it's a so I think only agriculture will help us define a more interesting edge of our cities. But I know it's not that easy. On architect's drawing, it's very easy to represent this kind of very urban agriculture, but how do you do it? Somebody explained me that engineers in agronomy today, because these studies are difficult, are divided in two camps. One camp is doing finance. The other camp, as I told you, tries to find the meaning to his life and is going in the protection of nature. And a very little number of people are really involved in agronomic techniques. And we have to invent something about that. Agroforestry probably is one way, but I guess there will be a lot of ways to deal with agriculture around city to improve the quality of our cities. So these are pictures of a model that shows that it is not a green belt. It works again with traces. It fits within the agricultural fabric or texture. It's a mixture of woods, fields, wetlands, pools. So mostly we will use a place to collect rainwater in poplar groves, very subtly sunken poplar groves that will host floods. We will clean water. So, I mean, we will use every known means to give some meaning and to finance this lisière. It is a kind of prototype. There will be a metro, big campuses. It's a big project. And right now we are building a mock-up, 100, I don't know in foot, but 120 meters by 120 meters, where there will be orchard, ditches, path, poplars grove, etc., etc. It's under construction now. Will be completed this spring. And I'm very hopeful with that, really. I think it's a key issue in our profession. Okay, even more difficult theme. So it's about city public spaces and what kind of commission can we think about in our profession. I will speak about city public spaces, strategies, and about mock-up prototypes. I mean, we have sometimes in Europe very interesting commissions. Like this is Toulouse, a city in the southwest of France, famous for history. And we are in charge with Joan Busquet, urban designer from Barcelona, to a strategy for planting all the city and renewing public spaces within this historical city. I do not comment it, just saying this exists. And we are doing the same thing in Bordeaux, in Anvers in Belgium. Also landscape architects are involved in Paris, Lyon, Barcelona. And it's very interesting to think, okay, in a city, a landscape architect team could help have a vision for the long term to have, okay, about public spaces. But in the same way, I'm very scared about building only abstract guidelines that will have no real effect and that will be boring and stored into closets. So I like to build guidelines and at the same time to build mock-up, prototype, to have physical actions. And this is just an example in Bordeaux, some gardens that are part of our framework for the whole city. This is a Patrick Blanc vertical garden, very anecdotic, but people love that. It's fantastic. This is more serious. It's about Marseille. Marseille, a city south of France. It has been built 2,600 years ago by the Greek. And we won a competition. I'm leading a team with Norman Foster as young architect. And we are, it's a joke, of course. And we are in charge of a vision for all public spaces for long term. And I have several things to say on this map. I'm trying to use this mouse. First, there is a big couple. We will refurbish public spaces along the harbor. This is quite 1 mile long. But we said, okay, we will refurbish these public spaces, but at the same time we will create a park system here, as long as the old harbor. And all thing together is 2 miles long. Sorry, I have to drink something. I'm losing my voice. So we had this discussion with students this afternoon. And the strange thing is today, beginning of the 21st century, we are doing this connection between cities and the sea. I mean, in a lot of harbor, like in Genova, it has been done 15 years ago, but a lot of different situations exist where there are still no connection between a city and the main place, I mean the sea, or the lake, or the river. It happens today. We are at the very beginning of a main transformation of city public spaces, and maybe this accompanies the fight we have against urban sprawl. I mean, okay, people will be back in city centers only if they will find park system, riverfront, seafront, etc., etc., these main public spaces. Think about it. In this city of Marseille, we are building now, I mean, everything here is like 5 kilometers, plus other urban designers are doing here, main waterfront as well. So kilometers and kilometers of public spaces that were not existing until now. And in Marseille, there were no, this is the second city in France. It hosts 1 million people, and there were no big public spaces. This is just happening now. And it shows how important our profession is going to be for cities today. Then another vision. We said, okay, this is going to be a mineral space, an artscape, because it used to be an harbor done by the Greek, and in no way we are going to bring trees on it, which it will look like Abu Dhabi, you know, or Florida. Sorry. And we thought, okay, but if we want these people to be back in the city, we need to build kind of garden, and we need to turn all these kind of previous piazza into gardens, because this extremely dense city, 4 square meter built for 1 square meter of a land, I mean even 25% denser than Paris, which is known as a very dense city. So I think we need to destroy urban block to build gardens. We need to have this garden within piazza. So we are working on everything. I mean, the harbor, the park system, and public spaces. And it's a long-term transformation. We are building a master plan with guidelines and big mock-ups. Sorry, this could have been easier. These are the gardens we will do. So this is the first step of the public space. We are building like 10 hectares of a piazza that previously was used by cars. And it was privatized. 70% of the surface was dedicated to traffic for cars, and 75% of the length of the harbor was privatized. Today, we only have 30% for cars and buses, and people could go everywhere. What to say on this picture? First, it's a void. I mean, there is no drawings, Adrien Reus, he lost the competition this time, did a fantastic drawing, but my guess was nothing was necessary. This city, I'm sorry about that. It's normal. I mean, we always are in competition. And I mean, it has been very moving because, so we took the risk of having nothing. It's a stone pavement and basta. And from the first day, the crowd came. And the crowd is still on it. Because the city was there, 2,600 years of history, of course. So it was very moving to see this life ready to be here. And previously, nobody was allowed to go there. And this is the very center of a city. So again, not to say this is an equal project, but just to say we have a lot of work to be done in Boston, in New York, and in, I don't know, in Providence, everywhere. You could think about this kind of transformation. And it works a lot. Of course, at night, you could have a crowd on it because it's empty. Emptiness is fantastic in a city, real emptiness. Nothing except stones. But not only, this is a park system only shown. I mean, we will have to plant thousands of trees to improve the quality of this park system at the very beginning of the harbor from the sea. And what you see on this kind of rendering is a long slope that rebuilt the previous natural geography and that will welcome big parking, of course, and this is the very gate of our park system. In a more modest way, we will transform and refurbish the waterfront with very little intervention. And it's a mixture of rebuilding natural geography, increasing the presence of piers, construction. Again, it's not a restoration, it's an invention. The park system is an invention. Not the park system in general. I mean, here in Marseille, collecting all these previous parcels is a new way. And it could have been done because everything is publicly owned. It's publicly owned by the army. And apparently we don't really need the army in this place. They do nothing. And the city can use these places to have this park in the very center of the city. But think about it. Everything is publicly owned. It's nice. It's a waterfront. It's beautiful. This is the Mediterranean. And it's so easy to just to change the status of places, create path, increase the presence of trees, and it will be done. It's only about having a vision and very subtle political interventions. And this could be done in a lot of different places. Another vision about public spaces in Anvers in Belgium. It used to be an harbor. The harbor has been moved a little bit downstream, closer to the sea. And this will be turned into development, urban development. And we were asked to think about a planting strategy on all this development. It's an anecdote, but we first say, oh, it's so beautiful, please don't put a single tree on it. And they say, okay, we will fire you. So we said, no, we will have trees. Wait. But in a massive way, what we didn't want is to give banality to this place. What makes an harbor beautiful is the big scale. I mean, this building on a harbor are not housing. They are huge building, and the magic of an harbor is a D measure. This is not probably not English, but you can imagine what it means. And we have been using planting blocks. So I mean dense micro wood that occupy only 15% of the surface. 85% remain previous stone. But in perspective, they built a very dense presence of trees. I will show you a mock-up. So this is a mock-up, and this is what it produces at the ground level. So using very small places gives this feeling of a massive presence of vegetation. On one direction, from the building, you keep the transparency to the water water. and it brought guidelines. So we did mock-up. This is about method, and now it's part of the guidelines of Anvers, and they are refurbishing the whole harbor with these rules. And I think it's very interesting. And the scale of it is interesting. But you see, it's not guideline, it's not a big drawing. It's a physical tool that is expanded to guidelines and real actions. This is in Almere, in the Netherlands, in Holland. It's a Remcolas project as well, and we had to work on a piazza. And we were, so this was in 2005. And it's about a vision on public spaces. And we brought the ideas that we could have an empty space, but with garden on the piazza. And of course, it has a connection with the Anvers project, of course, you can imagine it. So again, emptiness and dense gardens on a piazza that corresponds to a main car park built by Remcolas, and all the garden correspond to parking gates. This has been built, and I really like this contrast between the emptiness. It's 300 meters long with nothing. This was the first time in Holland that we brought stabilized gravel. Stabilized sand or stabilized gravel. Decomposed granite, she said. And this kind of stupid glass walls, like oasis, we have a capsule station of water. We are still in this public spaces strategy for a city. And it's about what needs our profession. This is in Baumer. This is a project that we did with Hervé de Laurent, and it has been completed last year. Previously there was a huge railway track, 9 kilometers long. It has been abandoned because there is a new fast-going train located in a different place. And we were asked to think about a boulevard, urban boulevard. We didn't want to make an urban boulevard. So we need all a succession of public spaces that welcome new urban development and also development, but that have meaning with the landscape. And it's all a series of different sequences from countryside to city center. It's very different from the classic boulevard that people go to. 2 rows of trees following the way. And it's about proposing a natural geographical vision, large-scale vision, and public spaces. 1 pictures, so 1 sequence on the perimeter of the city, or the middle of the boulevard, you cannot see it, and kind of French public spaces within the countryside. I agree that. But again, the French looking at the countryside. I think that we were asked to have the 2 rows of 9 working batches on 9 kilometers over the boulevard. So we brought again these guidelines on public spaces in the city, and you see it depends on where we are. And this is very central. We had the previous backyard of the city was a railway track square, and now with the new facade, you see people walking on it. But you also see all these living oaks, and representing 5,000 trees within the city, and it's like this natural forest crossing all these public spaces within the city. It gives a kind of geographical scale to this public space. New kind of commission we have. It is in Le Havre. It's an harbor on the west coast of France, Glimcher had a very good modern architect in France. But the harbor is collapsing, and the city doesn't have big public spaces. And we have been asked to think about a kind of strategy on these public spaces. And I just show this picture, and the strategy is to say, okay, we will have two things in this city. There is a large beach, already transformed by Alexandre Chimeta, French landscape architect, 15 or 20 years ago. And there will be this very long lawn, 7 hectares, instead of abandoned part of the harbor. And this couple again with these very big public space in the cities that again doesn't have many public spaces. Extremely cheap, extremely simple to do. Like it has been done in San Francisco with crucifix. And of course, again, within the open block, we have more gardens, so we different, but only we speak about that. Convincing people to do this very simple, unitary, unique thing. Law. Okay, last thing, easy thing to finish. It's longer than you. It's about composition. So in London, it's okay with the very speaker. It's secret. It will remain secret, but I'll give some pictures. And of course, composition according to me is deeply connected to context, where we are, what is the spirit, what is the meaning of shapes in a special place. This was a study in Dallas, where we did this public space between Foster's Opera House and Baumer and Van Colas and Rex Theatre. And I was impressed by parking lots everywhere, and by this building happening on parking lots. And we thought we could have this kind of composition, a kind of gardens like building on these empty spaces, and this kind of thing. I see this city like a main plate, divided as a grid by Jefferson Grid, and on it some building, towers, gardens. And we did this kind of pieces. It's a joke. So we get this box with all the pieces, and clients believe this was a project. And it was a big project. So I really like this emphasis given to the plinth of parking lot and this kind of composition of object. Secondary. It has been built in a very cool way like that, because it has been used quite this. So this was a competition we did for. I'm only speaking about competition. This was our proposal for Governor's Island. Unfortunately, we had the one. And this building was looking for and we had with both ONA and Rex team at this time, a kind of not very serious vision about this was a very big crisis, and I was very nervous, and we felt the crisis came, and that was coming, and I thought this could have been this micro-agriculture within the city. As a program, we thought, why not to experiment in Manhattan, a place where there will be small cultivation, people could have their animals into the earth, seeing vegetable, it was vegetable structure. Okay, this was a grid, the Jefferson grid, and okay, I was fascinated by the grid as a way to create an incredible landscape and an experimental landscape with this kind of practice that, according to me, are necessary to improve our museum. Composition, again, with a grid. This is our project in St. Louis around the expansion of the art museum. British architect David Chibok. Only a part of it has been completed. I mean, it will be completed as soon as people will pay for it. The beginning has been done. It's not too bad, but it's okay. And it's all about living with Jefferson Grid, with clearing the masses, and creating rooms, but not enclosure. There are transparency. I love this kind of sales of group, kind of fashion group. But slowly we're going to what's interesting more these days. And this was our convention over there in showing for water. And of course, we all love from James Baumer did the way looking at the land, because the title of the book is. And he showed how the wind interferes with topography, with nature sometimes, which in the US produces this fantastic world of a revealing nature. And Minnesota especially is very, it's a kind of caricature of this meeting of grid and topography. And we thought that this would be the way to grow a succession of micro-grid and theory. And what excited me at this time is the way the composition was consisting with going from a clearing to another one, but not like having a gate, having a fence when there is a grid. One would walk along the main axis, of course, which corresponds to what you see any time for this kind of business. But mostly people will go from a clearing to the one more organized. I like this kind of connection. It is a composition. And we did at the same time this kind of archipelago for a project in Stockholm, in Sweden. I'm very interested in that. When you move in boat in a small archipelago, you see this enclosed space. Anytime you have several successive visual plans, but when you move in an archipelago, all these plans are moving. Even in a garden, if you have this kind of pose, when you move through these blocks, you experiment this feeling of adding perspective, adding a depth. Anytime. I'm very interested in this kind of approach. And in this composition that we want and we are trust. It's in Novartis campus in East Hanover. Because of management in time, we thought we had to work with an archipelago. It's a project that we did during maybe 40 years. And we started immediately by some first walls. And we did this. And the part will be done by this kind of blocks. And the space where people will be are this kind of network of clearings. And to do that, it's really something that right now interesting. So there is emptiness and massive presence of truth. What Michael von did before us, which is very well done, is different. He had a kind of trees accompanying that. And maybe destroyed the magic of the scale of this very large park. It's a 56 hectares park. And to make it look bigger, because it's bigger, not that big, I think we need this contrast between mass and volume. And as a space, I want to play with this part. I've been looking more at what has been done in the 19th century, especially in Belgium, where there's a lot of park done like that, with valley clearings and massive presence of wood. We have a very deep understanding of the 19th century, which is a taboo, it looks old-fashioned. but people at this time sometimes had a fantastic control in proportion because they were working on site more than on plan, and the results are sometimes extremely good. So this is the way we are thinking about composition today. So because the big issue is controlling scale. If we want that to work, we have to control the result in scale. Sometimes it's not. So this is exactly what I want to use this comment. This was a study will show you that this will be. But you know what is different in this kind of part compared to what we sometimes do today? Today, one will draw paths. And then one will have trees, and one possibly will have some heat. It's very different from first having a composition of space with both topography, woods, clearings, and then finding the way to build the path. So, because we were inspired by this, the drawing, because of AutoCAD, maybe, the more visible drawing will be the path layer. So we draw the path, plastic drawing. And then we have trees, and we have volumes, and the space is nothing. So what and we do that every day, of course. And I'm trying to improve my profession, my practice. First, controlling a space within finding the good location for a path. Okay, this is the last project, the last picture, and very big because all this drawing now are part of the collection of the art in the world. This is very recent, I thought. Okay, that's finished.